Hello, my name is Paul Jenkins. I'm Managing Director of UK Packaging Innovation Consultancy at ThePackHub, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Justin Kempson, who is Director of Sales and Innovation at Charpak. Welcome, Justin.
Morning, Paul. Good to see you. Good to see you, even if it is remotely.
Delighted that you could join us today. So I'm really intrigued to ask. Tell me a little bit more about you and what you do.
Okay, so I've been in plastics in various forms. I started off in my early 20s in engineering thermoplastics. So that was nylons and acetyls and things like that. So that was extrusion at that time, what's called heavy section extrusion. I then left that and went into more into the packaging area. So it was high impact polystyrene sheet. I joined a business that when HIPS was in its heyday, one of our largest customers was somebody supplying M&S with all their bread and bakery products. And strange enough, in those days, it was all in white HIPS, and they switched out of white HIPS to go into PVC. Which now, sort of 30 years later, nobody wants PVC. And it was all about clarity in those days. Come out of white, go into a clear plastic, and it was all PVC. So over a period of years, I ended up buying the company I worked for. Carried on supplying high impact polystyrene, so that was for food and for toys. Just sheet into the general thermoforming market, and actually Charpak was one of my customers. Unfortunately, that business went under primarily because we ran out of cash. I mean, I'm being open and honest here, Paul. That was 9/11 happened. We all know what happened to pricing and general terms in terms of the market that happened there. And I just invested £750,000 in a new machine. And it was a very, very tough time. I was lucky enough that I got on very well with Charpak, with the directors at Charpak and the MD at that time. And they obviously spotted something in me, and I joined Charpak. That was in 2002. So I'm in my 19th year at Charpak now. And it's gone, essentially Charpak has gone from, a small SME to a reasonably sized SME that, and we've grown, in those 19 years by multiple times. And upon joining Charpak, we did very little in the food industry, but we'd already got BRC. And so we pushed more heavily into food, and it was kind of during the switch over from PVC to PET that I joined. And so we've, as Charpak, we've really heavily pushed into food, and now, so much so that 73% of all our business is in the food industry now.
You don't look old enough to have had all that experience.
Yeah, I can see my face on screen, Paul. I know you're joking.
So tell me a bit more about Charpak and then specifically Charpak.
Okay, well, so Charpak originally was a toy company called Charlie and Ben's, and they had a lot of home workers that it was injection molded toys, blow molded toys. So much so that our outer cartons are still called cricket boxes and hoopla boxes, because they used to contain cricket sets and hoopla sets. And we've still got those same size boxes now, because they're very good, on pallet fill. So that's our history. I mean, originally it was based in Surrey. It was, a mum and dad operation. The two sons grew up, joined the business. One of the sons is now technical director. He got interested in tool making, went to college, got his all his tool making qualifications, and was making, was designing and building tools for Charlie and Ben's. But then said, well, if we're doing that, why don't we make our own packaging? We sell into a toy brokers company. Why don't we make packaging for ourselves and then widen it out into other people? So a lot of the first thermoforms were for toys.
Okay.
And that was, and so that kind of moved Charlie and Ben's into creating Charpak, and you see the char from Charlie and Ben's became the char of Charpak. At one time, we also had a printing operation, and that was called Char Print. So it's always char at the front. I suppose then sort of Far East manufacturing, more or less killed off the toy making side of the business, and it ended up then standalone as Charpak. Growth up until 1998, we were based in St Neots. 1998, we purchased a much larger site, all on one site, because the old Charpak in St Neots was about 4 or 5 different buildings. As they grew, they took over another building. And so the move to Huntingdon was about consolidating everything under one roof. Set about growing the business, because obviously that was a much larger overhead going into Huntingdon. What I will tell you is that at that time, one of the main customers was actually Who Wants to Be a Millionaire board game. It was one of those very, very rapidly rising things. Caught the nation's attention and everything, and went mad for about a year, and then fell off a cliff. And the guys who licensed the product, it bought them a warehouse, it bought them a factory, it bought them Porsches. And as far as I know, they still have the Porsche, still have the factory, although it no longer has Who Wants to Be a Millionaire inside it. But that drove some good growth for Charpak. And as I said, a couple of minutes ago, it was primarily industrial toys, door furniture, electricals, electrical switches. That was their bread and butter at that time, and very, very little food. Things. Some of what we're talking about today is how the packaging market's changed over the last few years. Well, going back to that time, that was the time that, for example, door furniture, it was sort of brass and brushed chrome. It was sort of brushed chrome was started to come in, and brushed steel, all that type of stuff, and a lot of that went to India. And I think they would ship it over in boxes that was then repacked into plastic in the UK. So there's clam packs, a lot of clam packs, and obviously China and India woke up to the fact, well, why don't we send it over ready packaged, in its plastic? The DIY market took off. Sheds, the B&Qs and home bases set up operations in China and India, and it was kind of, you could see at that time the writing on the wall for that. So that was a diminishing market. The sort of UK did a lot less of it, and certainly the repacking of it. Although we do still have some customers in the switch, the electrical plating market. We've still got some customers in that. We also did for a long time Epson print cartridges. That was another big part of the business. That was a 6-month contract that stretched out to 7 years. Nice. They were going to set up their own site in the UK, and it just stretched out on and on and on and on. So again, during that time, we started to move into the food market, and as I said, PET was becoming more prevalent. Prior to that, it was PVC, and still a fair amount of HIPS. And so that started that drive into food. Once we got used to the vagaries and the very small window we had on PET right back at the start. You know, there was a very small forming window, you know, around temperature. If you got the, you know, PVC, if it wasn't forming very well, we would put more heat into it. You know, PET, that's the last thing you do is put more heat into it. You're more likely to take heat out than put heat in. So there was a learning curve on that. You know, but you know, whilst, you know, looking back, you can say, well, yes, actually, from an environmental perspective, PVC was you know, it's not a nice material. I mean, it's still ubiquitous now. A lot of flooring, a lot of backing for carpets is still PVC, although they are moving into more PP nowadays. So there is a lot less of it, but it's still here. But interesting enough, towards the tail end of PVC, we were, you know, it was 99% recycled content.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, it is nothing new. You know, way back in my engineering plastic days, we were recycling all our in-process waste, and we bought a recycled product from the raw material suppliers. So, you know, recycling and sustainability isn't necessarily new. But we just talk about it more now. You know, you know, it's always been the case that we've put product back in. You know, but as I say, we talk about it. So Charpak fundamentally, it's food packaging. Where, you know, we're very strong in confectionery. We're very strong in desserts and dairy, and also ambient cakes. Mini bites, that type of product, like small cakes and celebration cakes.
Okay, very good. And obviously, the last 5 minutes you've just talked a lot about sustainability and the growth and the increased focus on that as a strategy. I mean, tell me a bit more about what Charpak have been doing from a sustainability point of view.
Well, nicely for us, we actually predate planet Earth of our conversion to, you know, sustainability, you know, or certainly our process of telling people what we're doing. You know, as I said, we've always done it, but actually and I've got to think about my dates here because pandemic, we've kind of lost a year, I feel. I think I'm right in saying it was actually October 2017, and I believe Planet Earth came out in February 2018. So October 2017, I went to a conference organised by Plastics in Europe. It was a Barcelona conference, and we had a tour around a Barcelona MRF and looking at how plastics was recycled in Spain at that time. And it was kind of an eye-opening, you know, process that when you go and look at how it's sorted, you know, from home collected, you know, curbside collections. And I was out there with the marketing manager, and I sort of went round this MRF, and we sort of went out and had something to eat, and I started talking about how we could utilize that in the UK. I was very lucky that a manager happened to be married to the head of environmental for Cambridgeshire County Council. And he was coming out to meet her to have an extra couple of days in Barcelona with her while we're out there. So we got together, and I started talking about, was there a possibility of a collaborative partnership between Cambridgeshire councils, Charpak, and their waste contractors to reuse their curbside collected materials, rather than it just going into the market and, you know, and being priced by the market. You know, it's an up and down thing, and knowing that revenue generated from recycle it goes back into the council. So the more revenue they can generate from their recyclables, the more money they're getting.
Yes.
I didn't know at that time it's also shared with the waste contractor, but that's fine. You know, as you know, most curbside collections now are outsourced. So there's the big Veolias, Viridors, Biffers, and in Cambridgeshire it's Amy. It's a very small part of their business. That's AMEY. Amy, you'll know them as house builders as well, and lots of civil engineering projects. But they do have the contract with Cambridgeshire County Council to do all the collection and recycling. So that process started more or less as we came back from Barcelona, and over the next, it was, the first trial we had was round about February when Blue Planet hit, and all of a sudden there's this step change in the views of plastic packaging, primarily around single-use plastics. And again, it's how you specify something as a single-use plastic. A meat tray is a single-use piece of plastic, but it tended to be, in the consumer's eyes, it went to be all plastics, and that was plastic films, rigid thermoforms, plastic sachets, cutlery, drinks containers. It hit everything, and all of a sudden everyone said, well, cardboard, because of what it is and it's a natural product, that must be better. Let's all pile into that and make sure that we get rid of plastics, along with all of a sudden, well, black's not recyclable, and that that really it hit us hard in terms of nobody wanted black, but there was also this education piece of black is recyclable. It's totally recyclable. It contains the most recycled plastic. It's the most sustainable plastic there is, until you put carbon black in it, which makes it undetectable or not detected, because it's still detectable if you have the right piece of kit. Yes. But essentially it's not recyclable. It is eminently recyclable, just we can't find it.
Yes.
So that hit particularly hard, and a lot of my customers, Charpak's customers, were in black, and the root cause of why everybody was in black, there's two reasons. One is, when you look at, if you do a consumer's test on appearance and likability of a product, and why do we pick up products, all the consumer testing will tell you black makes a product look great. It makes it sing on shelf, and it makes people want to buy it. If you then ask the same question and say, from an environmental perspective, if black's not recyclable, do you want it in black? The answer is no. So on the one hand, consumers are attracted to it because it looks great, but on the environmental hand, well, I don't want it because it's in black and you can't recycle it. So there's this, dilemma of what you do with black. So a lot of companies switched away from black, and of course, the other reason a lot of companies were in black was because it was cheaper. It was more cost effective because it had a recycled content, and so it was a lot cheaper. Yeah. So it's cheaper to put something black on the market than it was to put it in clear, because the clear price, it was a couple of £100 a tonne cheaper to buy. And that impacts on the price the consumer pays when it's on the shelf. We all know that. So, it's the changes that drove led us down the road of, well, how can we solve that problem over here on clear? So that was the circle of life that were created. So on our clear products within Charpak, we had a collaborative partnership with Cambridgeshire County Council. So that's Peterborough City, Cambridge City, and there's about 8 other local authorities, so Ely and places like that, all the smaller towns and villages in Cambridgeshire. That's all processed locally to ours. It ends up at Waterbeach, out the other side of Cambridge, where it's baled up. So you get these massive bales of clear PET. So that's everything from Coke bottles, lemonade bottles, to pots, tubs and trays. So everything essentially that's collected curbside in Cambridgeshire goes through this process. And we then worked with another local company to ours, they were based in Corby, who we contracted to take all of that material from Cambridgeshire, reprocess it. So that's doing all the usual, splitting it apart, granulating it, cleaning it, and actually they re-extrude it. So we buy sheet back from them that contains the curbside collected recyclate from Cambridgeshire. So it's a really, really local. It travels from start to finish a total of 63 miles. So I'm also keeping it very local. We kind of followed the Ellen MacArthur guidelines on circular economy. So, localizing a circular economy has much more impact on everything. If you look at life cycle, and carbon footprint, CO2 emissions, brake dust, plastic coming off of lorry tires, all of that stuff that ends up in the atmosphere. If it doesn't travel far, there's less of it. It's a simple equation. That also gave us really good information on what Cambridgeshire were doing in terms of what gets thrown away, what gets recycled, and when I quote a 67%, 33% split on bottles versus pots, tubs, trays, I know that is fact because we've monitored it and we have really good data on that. So I know, generally speaking, and it's amazing the different authorities and the different type of recyclate that comes through the system. Peterborough City and Cambridge City are very different. There's very different collections than there are from the rural areas, and it's strange the differences between the two. But it's really interesting data, and it kind of points us as where we need to go in the future. It does help guide. Hence my presentation last week about bottles and about making sure we get more tray to tray recycling. Because if we're going to make plastic sustainable, it's back to my bugbear, is that we need to collect more of it, and then we need to recycle more of it. If we're only collecting half of it, that's all we can actually ever recycle, is half of it. And so we've got to do something that drives that up, and I do hope that, and that's become the fundamentals of what Charpak is about, is what are we going to do, to make sure that us as a business, we live in the community, we're sustainable, and what we put onto market is then sustainable, and how we can help the market make itself more sustainable, moving away from multi-layer trays. What can we do about mono PET? My own personal view is that food packaging in the UK, if it's going to go into a rigid thermoform, it should be one of two products only, either PET or PP. That's it, nothing else. And it should be mono PET. The PP is slightly more difficult in as much as we getting a PCR PP is going to be a challenge. I think that chemical recycling has a place in getting PCR back into PP. I think that for the taxation situation, the 30% RPP, we've now got it. We're working with our supplier that my post-industrial, so that's, when we're forming something, we have waste. When we're creating a forming, as you know, Paul, but essentially there is what's called skeletal waste. So where we're cutting products out, there is a bit left.
Sure.
And it's making sure that we reuse that. Historically, again, that's always gone back. But now we've closed loop that. So we've got a really good closed loop deal with our extrusion partner for polypropylene. So if I buy 10 tons of polypropylene, there's about, on a round product, there's probably 30% scrap. So there's about 3 ton that goes back. So my next 10 ton load contains that 3 ton that I've sent back. So we granulate it, send it back, and it comes back in, which for HMRC purposes, for plastic tax purposes, that is perfectly acceptable. For me, for us as Charpak, to make sure that goes back into our next one, it's a closed loop, and we've got full traceability because we know where it's come from. We bale that, we granulate it back, send it back, and it goes back into our mix. And so we've got a loop all the way through that shows, for HMRC purposes, that we've put 30% back in, so we don't have to apply the tax. So we are widening that out. We're talking to more and more customers of saying we can get you a 30% recycled polyprop. Yeah. So it's another good one. Again, that's kind of prevention of downcycling. It's only recently we've managed to, that certainly from extrusion point of view, of getting those sort of volumes back through. And when we originally looked at recycling granulates back into a formable sheet, we were looking at 5%, and we were never going to, were we ever going to get to 30%? But we've got to 30%. Without impacting on price, because the moment you have to start going down the chemical recycling route, you're adding another layer of cost into it, and that's going to be an issue. As long as we have, we have this cheap food, if you like, and I hesitate to call it cheap food, but we have this within the UK. We seem to think, well, we don't value food highly enough, and we want constantly reducing prices. We want to buy, I don't know, 4 chicken breasts for £5, and we want, a kilo of carrots for 30 pence at Christmas, or 19 pence at Christmas. If we're going to do that, then something has to give, and it tends to be on the packaging. Well, I'll drive the packaging price down. Yeah. So if you're adding cost into the packaging, it's not going to fly. Whatever you want to do from a sustainability perspective, you're always going to come up against that because the consumers won't buy it. No. It's a simple equation. If you said, well, I can give you a fully compostable tray to put your chicken in, but it's going to cost you twice as much, which for the tray, but that could be a 5% rise on the consumer, and they're not going to pay that.
Consumers will say they will pay more for sustainable packaging.
Yeah.
The reality is quite different.
Yes.
Well, tell me a little bit more about your Satchmo solution, which you talked so passionately about last week.
Yeah, I mean, that came about as a result of getting rid of black. Because, yeah, great, get rid of black, but what do you do with all the colours then? And it was actually Mark Call at Tesco, who, strangely enough, in 2018, I think it was presenting at the same conference I'd been at, a year or two earlier, in Barcelona. Contacted me, and I'd already started doing presenting that I had a pile of coloured PET trays along with some bottles, some Robinson fruit shoot bottles. I've done a couple of images that was, here's some black trays, here's a pile of colours, beware of unintended consequences. And that was basically all the slide said, which was beware of unintended consequences. If we get rid of that, what are we doing with that? And he phoned me up and said, I've got this conference, can I borrow your slide? I said, well, yes, as long as you credit Charpak, as long as you leave the Charpak logo on it, of course you can. Yeah, I promise you will. And he actually sent me a photograph of his presentation saying, look, I told you, I used your name. But he came back from that, and he then contacted probably all of his roster of suppliers, so all the rigid tray suppliers into Tesco, and said, what are we going to do about it? And the basic brief was, go and see what you can do. Give me any colour other than black. So, go and throw a load of recycled content in there, a load of colours, mix it all together and see what comes out of it. So sure enough, that's what industry did, and we all thought we were going to get brown. It's a bit like when when you're at school mixing colours and you mix every colour and you get brown, but it doesn't turn out like that. It's essentially whatever the dominant master batch colour of any blend you're doing, that's the colour you're going to get. So we ended up with some greens and some greys and some not yellows, some blues. Any strong master batch overwhelmed everything else in there, and that kind of became evolved from FAIR. But I, with my background in extrusion, so bear in mind I was in my early 20s, so that's a long time ago now. So I've spent a long time doing various different extrusion type roles where I know a bit about it. So I went up there, again, it was talking to master batch partners and extrusion partners and sort of talking through how can we devise something that gives us consistent colour. And so we played with some stuff, and this is where you drift into commercial confidentiality, but we played with some stuff and ended up with a really lovely silver colour that just happened to look like Tesco Finest silver. A couple of shades away from what it was then, but I loved it. It looked really nice. And then we got some greens and some blues that we could, and a gold that we could recreate consistently. So every time whatever we put in the middle, we could create this colour again, which is, essentially, if you think about it, the original brief was Tesco will do this as a badge of honour, and we'll put a lot of product into it, and whatever colour it is, we'll put it on the shelf. But then when you think, oh, hold on a minute, 1 month you could put sausages or mince or chicken or something in a brown one month, but the next month you're going to change to green, or the month after that it's going to go a sort of yellowy, bluey, colour, and it's going to change consistently. And then you've got to think, well, what food goes in it and what effect does that colour have on the food? And strangely enough, chicken's one of the worst ones in terms of if you put it in a colour that doesn't work, it can change the tone of what the chicken looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, that could have an impact on sales, and nobody wants an impact on sales. So this idea of getting a group of consistent colours worked financially. Because of the costs of it. Again, input costs are lower, so it's at worst it's cost neutral. We've got some master batch in there, but so essentially, I have to say that both from a Charpak point of view, Tesco have worked hand in hand with this. From Charpak's point of view, that's great because I have the power of the retailer pushing for it. I've got industry, and again, working with partners because of contacts we've made, Charpak have made with the recycling industry and the contractors that collect the stuff, and how we're going to create a market for it. We've worked very, very hard to get it to market. So to make sure that I can take post-consumer recyclate and reuse it to recreate these Satchmo colours. So we are saying, a lot of people don't get why it's called Satchmo. And if people who don't know the plastics industry, mixed colours are generally called jazz. And jazz, the way my brain works is that there was this guy called Louis Armstrong. He was a jazz pianist, jazz singer, and his nickname was Satchmo. So that's how we came up with the name of Satchmo, that connection with jazz. But we have changed it now. It's our, if you like, trademark. It's Satchmo, but it's jazz is the new black, because it is a viable replacement for black plastics. It is also saving clear plastic being made into a colour.
Yeah, that's really important.
And that's, for me, that's the biggest part of it, is that mixed colours will just get at the moment the majority of them are downcycled. So it's either energy from waste, strapping, park furniture. It's essentially you take all this stuff, you find it as a mixed colour and ship it off somewhere else. And generally speaking, it will be burnt. A lot of it's sent abroad. So it's near Europe. It's not, Far East stuff. It will go into Holland, Germany, Sweden, where they've got big energy from waste plants, because we don't build them in the UK, because planning laws don't allow it. I don't want it anywhere near my house, but do it over there. So it's about keeping it in the UK, and it's about reusing it in the UK, and then prevention of this valuable resource that is clear, keeping clear for clear, and then using colours to make new colours. And again, that becomes more circular if you're putting it on the market. The only constraint you've got is it must be detectable.
Yes.
And again, from a Charpak point of view, any new colour we put on the market, we test it in a MRF to make sure it's findable before it goes onto the market. Because the last thing I want to do is put something else that is not detectable onto the market.
Yes.
And again, that comes back to the core beliefs within Charpak to say whatever we put onto the market has to be from a sustainable source and is sustainable. And again, that's why I haven't gone down the 100% route, because it isn't there. For the jazz market, I've got 86% recycled content, and more than 50% of that is post-consumer.
Brilliant. It sounds like it's an evolutionary sort of development process, iteration, changing, improving, modifying.
Yeah. And from the other, with my environmental and sustainability hat on, even when we looked at even things like master batch content, if you're taking a clear plastic and making it into a colour, you've got to colour the whole lot.
Yeah.
Now, I only colour the outside of Satchmo, so I've got net 1% master batch content. So I'm only adding a net 1% master batch, which is, again, that helps with pricing, but also in terms of environmental, that's, it's another win.
Yeah.
That's and as long as it's detectable, I'm comfortable with it. And the technicalities of it is what marks it out as different from the other items on the market. And we think, touch wood, I do have a wooden table here. We think that we've just cracked the code in terms of more colours, because we were very limited with colours. I think we had about 6 or 7 colours, and we couldn't really expand it along outside of that. And we didn't have a red, because red is a very, very difficult colour in terms of master batch. It's more of a ink-based colour, and that's very difficult to cover up what's on the inside. What tends to happen is the stuff underneath it tends to bleed through, so you get streaks on the red, or you'll get greens that are bleeding through. And effectively, it's just about light. It's there's light coming through, so you can see what's underneath.
Justin, your passion and knowledge of the packaging industry is enthusiastic. It's really, really good to hear. So, how can people contact you?
They can just through Charpak's website on inquiries, gets through to me. That's the easiest way. But also, my email address is not hard. It's justin.kempson@charpak.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn, so anybody can find me on LinkedIn. I don't cover myself up. Even through ThePackHub, give you a shout out, Paul, because again, you know who we are. If someone wants to find us, they can track us down through ThePackHub, and The funny thing is, Paul, is that the more time I've spent with you, I like what you do. I think ThePackHub is, a really, really good service. In terms of, look, let's see what's happening in the packaging market. So I do really appreciate.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Justin. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Paul.